Welcome to Reformed Thinking, the show that helps you grasp grand ideas and apply them to life. I'm your host, ready to dive into a new topic today.
And I'm here to help us distill insights from our sources.
Today we're embarking on a deep dive into the truly captivating world of the books of 1 and 2 Kings. We've gathered some wide-ranging sources that clearly lay out how this ancient text unfolds and, well, what it truly aims to get across.
Right. Our aim for this deep dive is to unpack the central truth of Kings, how God's history-shaping word, spoken through his prophets, reveals itself to be, well, greater than any king's physical strength. We'll examine how this fundamental truth shaped the destiny of a nation and what it reveals about IAM's consistent rule.
We will look at how the kings were assessed, the vivid confrontations they had with prophets, and the results of disobedience, all while keeping a firm grip on the covenants IAM made with his people. You're about to uncover how these ancient stories offer lasting insights for us today. 1. The big picture. IAM's rule over earthly kings. Okay, let's start with the grand truth our sources highlight in the books of 1 and 2 Kings. It really turns on its head our common way of viewing history. We often assume that rulers, their armies, political maneuvering, that's what shapes events. But Kings offers a very different perspective.
It certainly does. The main message resonates throughout. The prophetic word holds more sway than the king's sword. This idea grounds the whole narrative, showing that while kings possessed, temporal might, they frequently used it against IAM and his covenants. They mistakenly believed that their own strength, not faith in IAM, was the guiding truth for their nation. They commanded armies, built fortifications, devised strategies. Yet the text consistently argues that these visible displays of human authority were secondary to a deeper, unseen force.
So if I'm hearing this right, the prophets, who had, like you said, only words in their mouths, not swords in their hands, they were the actual guiding force. That sounds incredibly counterintuitive to how we typically imagine governments and nations working.
It really is. IAM maintained his rule through these friends who were spiritually charged and served as Israel's conscience. They, far more than the kings, truly stand out in the narratives in the book. You'll notice the narrative, it slows down considerably, giving extensive space to their actions and pronouncements. This brings home the point that IAM alone rules, and Israel's eventual exile wasn't some random misfortune. It was the just outcome of their persistent disregard for divine counsel. Their history wasn't accidental. It was orchestrated according to IAM's declared intentions.
And the author of Kings, often described as an implied prophet historian, doesn't just tell a story, they craft it with a very specific outlook. How does their particular way of writing, their chosen method of presentation, communicate this unique truth? It's not simply what they say, but how they structure the narrative.
Well, this author, very likely the Deuteronomist, makes very deliberate choices about the narrative pacing. For many kings, their reigns are summarized briefly within consistent governmental patterns, often just a few verses outlining their reign, their age, a quick evaluation. However, when figures like Elijah and Elisha appear, the narrative slows right down, dramatically. You'll find entire chapters, sometimes multiple chapters, dedicated to their miracles, their messages, their direct confrontations with the kings.
And this deliberate slowing down, this spotlight, it's meant to draw our gaze to the prophets and what they accomplish. It's a clear signal from the author about where the actual significance lies.
That's it. This structural choice makes it clear that these mighty prophets represent true strength and the kingdom that lasts. The very structure of the book acts as a theological assessment, making it plain that IAM upholds his covenants and that Israel truly has no excuse for not recognizing his universal rule. The book reinforces Deuteronomic theology, showing the very nature and conditions of God's active kingdom here on earth. It's a carefully constructed argument that history isn't arbitrary, but guided by divine will and covenant faithfulness. 2. The structural framework, covenants and evaluations.
Okay, one pattern we see throughout Kings is the governmental patterns. These are standard repetitive ways the author introduces and concludes the reign of each king. What are these exactly, and why are they so central to the author's overall message? They seem like much more than just historical notes.
Oh, they are far more than mere notes. These patterns provide a consistent chronological arrangement for each king's reign, bringing a sense of order across 4 centuries of complex history. They include factual details like when a king took the throne, how their reign synchronized with the king of the opposing kingdom during the divided monarchy period, their age at accession, how long they reigned, their capital city, and for Judah, the name of the queen mother. After their reign, there are death notices, references to source documents, details about their successor. It's a remarkably consistent formula repeated for almost every single monarch.
So it's not just a dry historical record, it's a consistent way to assess the kings, a built-in system of theological review, if you will.
Absolutely. These entry and exit points for each king allow the prophet historian to evaluate them from a spiritual viewpoint, whether they did what is right or evil in the eyes of I am. This evaluation wasn't based on their political achievements or military triumphs. It centered entirely on their spiritual stance and fidelity to I am.
And what was the clear standard for right or evil? How did the author measure their conduct?
It was the Mosaic covenant. Adherence to it brought covenant blessings, while disobedience brought curses. The primary spiritual check was adherence to the very first specific instruction of Deuteronomy, to have only one central sanctuary for I am's worship. More than one sanctuary suggested the worship of more than one god and amounted to idolatry. This single point, which can sometimes be overlooked in our modern reading, was utterly central to their faithfulness.
Right. This makes it clear that for the writer, history and theology are completely woven together. You simply can't understand one without the other.
Precisely. The spiritual principles rooted in I am's covenants determine the course of history. The consistent repetition of these governmental patterns, it sort of shouts the message aloud. I am, not the king, rules Israel in harmony with his covenants. He remains faithful to both his unconditional Abrahamic and Davidic covenants, for example, by ensuring a lineage for David even amidst disobedience, while also bringing about the blessings and curses of the conditional Mosaic covenant. It's a grand demonstration of his unchanging nature and his active hand in human affairs.
Beyond these individual governmental patterns, the entire Book of Kings has a larger chiastic structure. This is a literary pattern that folds back on itself, like a grand architectural design for the whole narrative.
Yeah.
How does this overarching structure help us grasp the book's central message?
Well, the chiasm, which you can visualize as an ABC-XCBA pattern, places the Omrid dynasty at its very center. This structure visibly strengthens the book's spiritual teachings. It's a deliberate choice by the author to guide the reader through the narrative's spiritual argument, drawing attention to what matters most.
Okay, so the outer sections, A and A, they refer to Solomon and the kingdom of Judah. That's both the beginning and the end of Judah's main story in this account.
That's right. Solomon's divided spiritual affections, his compromises, ultimately lead to the kingdom's fracturing. Later, Judah, even with some good kings, like Hezekiah and Josiah, still faces exile because of kings like Manasseh and Josiah's sons. The parallel between Solomon's initial compromise and Judah's final downfall is made abundantly clear by this carefully crafted structure.
And the B and B sections relate to the separation and eventual fall of the northern kingdom. What's the thread that ties those parts together?
No northern king truly followed I am's ways. They consistently adopted the false worship established by Jeroboam, son of Nebat. This led to constant turning away from I am, which guaranteed their eventual captivity. The chiasm highlights this unbroken line of disobedience in the north, leading inevitably to their predetermined end.
The center, the X, is the Omrid dynasty. Why this family in particular? Why is it the pivot point of the whole structure?
The Omrid dynasty, especially King Ahab, through his marriage to Jezebel, installed Baal worship as the recognized state religion in Israel. This was a direct, wholesale rejection of I am, escalating their turning away from him beyond anything seen before. It is in this truly dire crisis that I am's strength overrides temporal might through his swift-appearing prophets, Elijah and Elisha. The central attention on the Omrids makes it clear that the prophetic word truly holds more sway than the king's sword. It represents the height of the king's wickedness and thus the peak of IMM's decisive action. 3. Solomon's reign, the seed of division.
Solomon's reign begins with such incredible promise, almost like a golden era, a high watermark for Israel. Yet it concludes in tragedy and division. What was the central spiritual issue that set this decline in motion?
Well, the narrator immediately highlights Solomon's spiritual double-mindedness. While he initially displayed his devotion to I am by walking in David's ways and humbly asking for wisdom, his marriage to Pharaoh's daughter was an early indication of disloyalty. This wasn't just a political alliance, it was a subtle breach of I am's commands against intermarrying with foreign nations, a quiet signal of a heart that wasn't completely devoted.
And this early compromise seemed to delay the building of the temple and allowed people to continue worshiping at high places, despite I am's clearly stated desire for one central sanctuary. It seems like a small misstep, but it led to very large consequences.
Yes. This early relaxation of I am's law foreshadowed his later, complete turning away from I am. The wisest man before Jesus Christ ultimately dies as one who made foolish choices because he stopped listening to divine instruction. His wisdom, initially a gift for I.A.M.'s kingdom, became increasingly directed towards his own splendor rather than I.A.M.'s renown. For example, he amassed immense wealth, gold, so plentiful it made silver seem common. He built a vast array of chariots and horses, 1,400 chariots, 12,000 horsemen. Direct defiance of Deuteronomy 17, which warned kings against multiplying horses, and of course multiplying wives, 700 princesses, 300 concubines, another clear violation. These weren't just practical choices, they were spiritual breaches.
The narrative gives us a striking detail when it talks about Solomon's building projects. His palace was considerably larger than the temple. This isn't just an architectural fact, is it? What's the deeper meaning here?
The prophet historian, with deliberate design, interrupts the account of the temple building to describe Solomon's palace complex. This interruption, which isn't necessarily chronological, subtly suggests the division within Solomon's heart. It's a narrative choice to draw our attention to this internal shift in loyalty.
So, this architectural choice stands as a visual clue, a powerful way to convey his shift in affections. His priorities were literally built into the landscape around him.
Absolutely. It indicates that as his devotion became increasingly split, his wisdom also became more and more directed toward his own grandeur, not I.A.M.'s glory. His vast accumulation of riches, his impressive display of chariots and horsemen, and his demanding labor practices for some of his people further illustrate this self-indulgence. Our sources call these decisions time bombs ticking away in his kingdom. These choices, while appearing to be signs of strength and success, were actually symptoms of a deeper spiritual ailment.
What was the ultimate failure that solidified Solomon's decline and led to the tearing apart of his kingdom? What was the final breaking point?
His increasing fixation on foreign women, from nations with whom he was explicitly forbidden to intermarry, ultimately turned his heart completely away from I.A.M. He started worshiping detestable gods at their shrines, literally polluting the land and defiling the very sanctity of the temple he had built for I.A.M. Unlike his father David, he did not repent when confronted with his wrongdoing. This was a complete and utter abandonment of the foundational covenant with I.A.M.
And I.A.M.'s response was decisive. It wasn't a slow erosion of favor, but a direct, announced judgment.
In anger, I.A.M. foretold that he would tear away a substantial part of the kingdom from David's dynasty. This action was fully in harmony with the conditional aspect of the Davidic covenant. While I.A.M.'s promise to David for an everlasting dynasty was unconditional, the enjoyment of its privileges within the land was directly connected to obedience. I.A.M. even raised up adversaries, like Hadad of Edom and Rezon of Damascus, to destabilize Solomon's kingdom from within and without, showing his guiding hand even in human opposition and turmoil.
And this is where the prophets reappear, directly influencing the succession. This demonstrates their true spiritual force.
It does. The prophet Ahijah of Shiloh then openly announces Jeroboam's kingship and the division of the kingdom, demonstrating how I.A.M. rules Israel through spiritual speech that goes beyond mere human political maneuvering. It wasn't Solomon's final decision nor Rehoboam's poor judgment, but I.A.M.'s word through his prophet that truly charted the course of events. 4. The sin of Jeroboam, setting a pattern of apostasy.
Following the kingdom's division, Jeroboam becomes the first king of the northern kingdom. He had a unique opportunity to lead, to set a new course, but he chose a path of his own creation. What drove him to create his own worship system rather than staying with what I.A.M. had clearly established?
Well, Jeroboam's primary motivation was personal ambition for his dynasty and a noticeable lack of reliance on I.A.M.'s word. He feared that if the people continued to travel to Jerusalem, which was the divinely appointed worship center in the southern kingdom, they would eventually return their loyalty to Rehoboam, the king of Judah, and ultimately remove him from the throne. So he feared the people and the instability of his reign more than he feared I.A.M., and he listened to advisors who lacked spiritual guidance. His actions were rooted in human fear and a desire for self-preservation, not in divine direction.
So in essence, he fundamentally violated the Mosaic covenant's instruction for one central sanctuary. This wasn't just a minor deviation, but a core breach of the covenant, right?
Precisely. He set up alternative sanctuaries and created his own liturgies in the northern kingdom, specifically at Bethel and Dan. And most egregiously, he reimagined the invisible I.A.M. as golden grass-eating calves. This is a chilling echo of Israel's earlier sin during the Exodus, when Aaron made the golden calf. And it dangerously connected I.A.M. with pagan fertility cults. He created what our sources call a liturgy of the king's own imagination, effectively turning himself from a leader like Moses, who faithfully presented I.A.M.'s commands, to one like Aaron, who succumbed to the people's demands for calf worship.
What were the immediate and then the much longer-term consequences of this sin of Jeroboam? It seems this single act had ripple effects for centuries.
His actions, described as outright idolatry and disobedience, resulted in severe judgment against him, against his family line, and against the land itself. Prophets, including Ahijah of Shiloh, who had originally announced his kingship, later prophesied his downfall and the cursed end of his dynasty. This shows a startling consistency in I Am's word. What is spoken will indeed come to pass, often through unexpected means.
And there's a truly notable prophecy about King Josiah in Judah, centuries later, that shows the distant reach of I Am's word.
Yes, another prophet from Judah appeared directly before Jeroboam, condemning his false liturgy and predicting its destruction by King Josiah centuries later. This long-range prophecy was given credibility by an immediate sign. The altar at Bethel was destroyed on the spot, and Jeroboam's hand, which he stretched out in anger, withered and was then supernaturally restored. This provided undeniable proof of I Am's control over history, confirming that the distant prophecy would also certainly be fulfilled.
And this sin of Jeroboam became the defining characteristic of the northern kingdom, setting it on a path that led to its ultimate downfall. It was a pattern that repeated itself with almost every king who followed.
That's it. With the solitary exception of Ahab, every subsequent northern king adopted the sin of Jeroboam, son of Nebat.
Hmm.
This unending turning away from I Am was the primary reason leading to the northern kingdom's exile from the land, a fate foretold centuries earlier by Moses and I Am's prophets. This clearly demonstrates how I Am's covenant principles consistently guide the course of history, even across many generations of kings. 5. The Omrid dynasty. Unprecedented evil and prophetic confrontation.
Okay, our sources call the Omrid dynasty the worst. That's a very strong label, especially when we consider all the kings who did evil. What did they do that was so uniquely terrible, even beyond Jeroboam's foundational sin?
Well, the house of Omri, particularly King Ahab, cemented their status as the worst through his marriage to Jezebel. This alliance led to the installation of Baal worship as the official state religion in Israel. This was a direct, wholesale rejection of IMM, escalating the nation's turning away from him beyond anything previously witnessed. While Jeroboam at least attempted to worship IM, albeit in a corrupted form with the calves, the Omrids actively brought in a foreign deity to be the national god, persecuting IM's prophets and dismantling his altars.
Wow, and this abandonment of IM also led to a shocking abandonment of Mosaic ethics, which we see so vividly in the Naboth's vineyard incident. It shows how spiritual deviation has terrible moral ripple effects.
It does. Ahab's actions concerning Naboth's vineyard showcased a complete disregard for IM's laws and justice. Naboth owned a vineyard that Ahab coveted. When Naboth refused to sell it, citing ancestral inheritance law from IM, Ahab sulked like a child. Jezebel, however, took matters into her own hands. She orchestrated a false accusation of blasphemy against Naboth using corrupt elders and false witnesses. Naboth was then stoned to death, and Ahab simply took possession of the vineyard. This chilling episode displayed a worldview where might is right, where human rulers felt entitled to disregard IM's law for their own desire. In direct response to this extreme disobedience, IM raised up his powerful prophets Elijah and Elisha to directly confront these kings. This was a crisis that called for dramatic spiritual intervention.
Elijah bursts onto the scene like a comet, appearing abruptly and confronting Ahab directly. His very first action is to announce a severe drought, which seems like an unbelievably bold move against a king.
This declaration of drought was a direct challenge to Baal, the Canaanite storm god, who was believed to control rain and fertility. It powerfully demonstrated that I Am alone is God and controls creation, and that his prophets shape history by their spiritually energized words, not by political muscle. Amidst the drought, I Am miraculously provided for Elijah, through ravens bringing him food, and later through a Canaanite widow whose small supply of flour and oil never ran out. He even restored her son to life, showing I Am his complete provision and life-giving authority, even in times of severe scarcity.
And then, of course, there's the unforgettable confrontation on Mount Carmel. It's one of the most famous stories in Kings.
This dramatic contest decisively affirmed Elijah's understanding of IM's covenant against Baal's false claims. It proved IM's sole strength and led to the execution of the false prophets of Baal, effectively purging the land of that terrible idolatry. Elijah's physical dominance over Ahab, even outrunning Ahab's chariot back to Jezreel after the rain came further, showed that the king was as helpless as the god he worshipped. It was a public, undeniable display of divine authority over false worship.
Elijah's experience at Mount Horeb is also very telling. He expects IM in grand, destructive displays of force, but instead he finds him in a gentle whisper. What do you make of that distinction?
Well, the destructive wind, earthquake, and fire that preceded the whisper symbolize IMM's universal judgment and the coming retribution, which would indeed arrive through agents like Hazael, Jehu, and Elisha against the Omrid dynasty. But the gentle whisper represents IM's unique presence within his particular kingdom, the faithful remnant of 7,000 Israelites who had not bowed to Baal. This reveals IM's preserving and protective care even amidst widespread turning away from him, showing a deeper, quieter aspect of his rule that sustains his chosen people even when the majority goes astray.
Elijah, knowing his time is drawing to a close, prepares Elisha to continue his prophetic ministry. How does Elisha contribute to this ongoing confrontation with the Omrid dynasty and their legacy?
Elisha takes up Elijah's mantle, literally, and continues his work, performing amazing miracles and delivering IM's messages. He plays a key part in the fulfillment of IM's judgment against the Omrid dynasty, with agents like Hazael, the king of Aram, and Jehu, an Israelite commander, carrying out the purge that destroys Ahab's line. Elisha's many miracles, ranging from healing Naaman's leprosy to making an axe head float, serve to further confirm the absolute authority of IM's word in Israel, demonstrating that IM was still actively involved with his people.
And other prophets, like Micaiah ben Imlah, also stood against Ahab. What do these additional prophetic voices teach us about IM's workings?
Micaiah directly predicted Ahab's death in battle, standing in stark contrast to 400 false prophets who merely flattered Ahab, telling him what he wanted to hear. Micaiah's prophecy, chillingly fulfilled by a random arrow that struck Ahab, showed that true prophecy, not false, is what truly shapes Israel's history. These multiple prophetic witnesses serve to illustrate that IAM's judgment against Ahab and Israel was just and fully declared, proving that all prophecy is under IAM's rule and consistent with his covenant. 6. Validating IAM's prophets, signs of his rule.
For the people of Israel living through these times, or for us reading these stories today, how could one distinguish a true prophet of IM from a false one in the Book of Kings? What were the clear indicators they should look for?
Well, the most compelling confirmation was the precise fulfillment of their prophecies through historical events, often ironically carried out by those who actively opposed IM. For instance, the deaths of kings Nadab and Baasha, two early northern kings, fulfilled the earlier prophecy given through Ahijah concerning the destruction of Jeroboam's house. Events that might have seemed like mere human ambition or unfortunate accidents were, in fact, the working out of a prior divine word. This consistent fulfillment over time gave credibility to the prophets.
And even older, more remote prophecies, like Joshua's concerning the rebuilding of Jericho, are meticulously fulfilled in Kings. This truly demonstrates the long-term consistency of IM's word.
Yes. Centuries after Joshua's curse on anyone who would rebuild Jericho, Hiel of Bethel rebuilt it during Ahab's reign. And it cost him his firstborn son Abiram and his youngest son Segub, fulfilling Joshua's ancient word precisely. And immediate prophetic signs, like the Judahite prophet's altar being destroyed on the spot before Jeroboam, served to confirm more remote prophecies, such as Josiah's future desecration of Jeroboam's altar centuries later. This layered fulfillment provides solid evidence that IM actively shapes and rules history according to his covenants from beginning to end.
So the precise fulfillment of predictions about royal succession, dynastic downfalls, and even architectural curses all serve to prove the authenticity of the prophetic word. It wasn't just good guesswork, it was foretelling.
That's right. That's exactly it.
Beyond foretelling the future, prophets also performed truly incredible miracles. What was the purpose of these signs? They weren't just, parlor tricks for entertainment.
No, not at all. Prophets wielded awesome signs and wonders that truly magnified IM and confirmed the validity of the Mosaic covenant. Elijah's declaration initiating a drought on Ahab's realm, as we discussed, displayed that I am alone is God and that his prophets shape history by their spiritually energized words. These acts were not just displays, they were direct statements about who held ultimate authority over creation and human affairs.
Miracles like the widow's unending flour and oil and the resurrection of her son further confirmed Elijah's promises and IM's divine care. They showed both his sustaining provision and his amazing authority over life and death itself.
And the calling of fire down from heaven on Mount Carmel decisively confirmed Elijah's covenant-centered worldview against Baal, showing IM's strength over all elements and false deities. Even Elijah calling fire down on Isaiah's messengers show that IM's prophets are greater than satanic influences and are instruments in shaping Israel's destiny. These were undeniable demonstrations of IM's true spiritual might breaking into the world.
What was the consistent truth that these true prophets always spoke? What was their core message that they never strayed from?
True prophets consistently presented and upheld IAM's historic covenants, particularly the conditional Mosaic covenant. They functioned as Israel's conscience, ensuring I.M. maintained his rule in harmony with his covenants. They were the clear voice of divine instruction and warning.
They truly served as the decisive factor for a king's obedience, especially regarding the critical instruction for one central sanctuary for worship. They held kings to account on this specific foundational issue.
Right. They spoke I.M.'s word without fear or favoritism, directly confronting kings for their disobedience in stark contrast to those who feared people more than God. The severe consequences for even a prophet's own disobedience, like the Judahite prophet killed by a lion because he disobeyed a simple instruction from I.M., confirm the absolute authority of I.M.'s commands delivered through his prophets. It showed that true prophets are not above God's word, but are completely subject to it, serving as his messengers, not their own. 7. Concluding reflections. The lasting truth.
So it becomes abundantly clear throughout Kings that Israel's tragic decline, from Solomon's initial golden era to the bitter exile, was not just random history or bad luck. It was a direct outcome of the king's widespread disobedience to I.M.'s covenants.
Indeed. The book consistently demonstrates that I.M.'s prophetic word is ultimately greater than any king's political might. Kings often believed that their strength, not faith in I.M., was the real path forward, but I.M. proved them wrong time and again. Their temporal authority simply could not override divine will or divert his declared purposes.
From Solomon's initial spiritual divided loyalty, which truly fractured the covenant, to Jeroboam's establishment of outright turning away from I.M. in the north, and Ahab's unprecedented institution of Baal worship as the state religion. Each stage of disobedience led to precise, foretold consequences. There's a clear cause and effect relationship established by the Deuteronomist author.
Exactly. The division of the kingdom, dynastic instability and destruction, and covenant curses like famine, war, and exile were all direct fulfillments of I.M.'s declared intentions. I.M. even used human foolishness, such as Rehoboam's bad advice to his people, to bring about his history-shaping word, demonstrating his complete rule over Israel. No human action, whether wise or foolish, could ultimately thwart his sovereign purpose.
So the persistent truth running through Kings is I.M.'s consistent faithfulness to his covenants, even amidst widespread rebellion and turning away from him. His word, spoken by his prophets, truly shakes history and brings about his will in every generation.
Maybe a final thought for you listening. If I.M.'s words so precisely determined the rise and fall of kings and guided the destiny of an entire nation as vividly revealed in 1 Kings, what does this understanding reveal about the ultimate force at work in the world around you today? What does this mean for your perspective on history, current events, and even the unfolding narrative of your own life? What do you believe is truly shaping destiny? Is it human might or something far greater?
And that concludes our deep dive into the Book of Kings. We trust this discussion has offered you valuable insights into the authority of I.M.'s word over all earthly strength.
Thank you for joining us on the Deep Dive. Until next time.
We hope you've enjoyed this deep dive. You can find more of our deep dives at reformedthinking.com.